The first time I realized the HOA might actually get someone killed, an ambulance was screaming toward my house, and I was standing there watching its front wheels sink into mud that did not belong to them. Red lights bounced off my barn doors. A stretcher rattled inside the back. And a woman in a pink blazer was screaming about bylaws while a paramedic shouted that he could not move forward. That was the exact moment I understood this was no longer about rules or property values. This was about control gone feral. I live at the end of a long gravel driveway that cuts through a strip of land my family has owned for decades. It is not fancy. It is not gated. It is simply the only way in or out, and everyone around here knows it. When the housing development went up a few years back, they built right up to my property line like they were trying to breathe down my neck. New people arrived. Fresh fences. Fresh opinions. Fresh confidence. And soon after that, an HOA appeared, complete with clipboards, laminated badges, and a woman named Linda who spoke like every sentence was already a final warning. It started small. Notes on my mailbox about dust. Complaints about the sound of my truck. A letter suggesting I pave my driveway at my own expense so it would look more uniform with the neighborhood aesthetic. I ignored most of it because none of it applied to me. I am not part of their HOA. I never signed anything. My land predates their development by generations. That fact seemed to irritate Linda more than anything else. You could see it in her eyes when she stood at the edge of my driveway like it offended her personally. One afternoon she showed up with 2 board members and a folded map. She pointed at my driveway like it was a stain. She said the board had decided it was a shared access hazard. She said emergency vehicles would be confused. She said they were banning its use until further notice. I laughed because the idea was so absurd it sounded like a prank. She did not laugh back. She told me I had 30 days to comply or face consequences. I asked her to explain how a private driveway on private land could be banned by people who did not own it. She said the HOA lawyer was very confident. The next week, orange cones appeared at the entrance. Not placed gently. Jammed into the ground like little plastic thread. Then a sign. Unauthorized access prohibited. I pulled them out and tossed them in my truck. The following day, someone dumped a load of filled dirt across the driveway entrance. Not enough to block a tractor. Just enough to make a statement. I called the county. They told me it was a civil matter. I called my lawyer. He told me to document everything. Then my neighbor Carl collapsed. Carl is in his 70s and stubborn as a fence post. He had been helping me stack lumber when he went down hard, clutching his chest like it was trying to escape his body. I called 911 and dragged him into the shade while the dispatcher kept me talking. Sirens came fast. Too fast for what happened next to make any sense at all. The ambulance turned off the main road and slowed as it hit the dirt. The driver hesitated. I saw confusion through the windshield. Then the front tires dipped, and the whole thing lurched like it had stepped into a trap. Mud splashed up the sides. The engine revved. Nothing happened. A paramedic jumped out and looked down at the mess like it had personally betrayed him. That was when Linda appeared. She came marching over with her phone raised, recording, narrating, talking about restricted access and prior notice and community safety standard. The paramedic shouted at her to move. She told him he could not proceed without authorization. He stared at her like he could not believe a human being had just said that out loud. I felt something cold slide down my spine. I yelled that a man was dying. She told me to calm down. The driver radioed for assistance. Carl groaned behind me, shallow breaths, eyes half gone. I grabbed a shovel from my truck and started digging like a madman, throwing mud aside with no plan other than rage and panic. The paramedic joined me without asking. Another neighbor ran over. Linda kept filming, stepping back to keep her shoes clean. It took 10 minutes to clear enough ground for traction. 10 minutes that felt like a lifetime. When the ambulance finally moved, it tore ruts into the driveway deep enough to swallow a boot. They loaded Carl and took off, lights screaming louder than before. Linda stood there with her phone lowered now, face tight, lips pressed thin. She said something about liability. I told her to get off my land before I said something I could not take back. Carl survived. Barely. The doctor later told me those minutes mattered. I did not sleep that night. I stared out my window at the torn-up driveway, the cones reappearing at the edge like they had grown there, and I knew this was not over. Not even close. The HOA had crossed a line they could not uncross. And they had done it in front of witnesses, cameras, and sirens. The next morning, I found a certified letter taped to my door. It cited safety violations. It referenced the ambulance incident like it proved their point. It demanded immediate closure of the driveway pending review. I sat at my kitchen table, letter shaking in my hand, and realized something very important. If they were willing to let an ambulance get stuck just to be right, then whatever came next was going to be ugly. And I was done playing nice. By sunrise the driveway looked like a crime scene that had tried to clean itself up and failed. Deep tire ruts dried into crooked scars. Mud was smeared up the fence posts where the ambulance had fought its way free. Someone had replaced the cones overnight, lined up neatly this time, like soldiers who had learned discipline. I stood there with coffee going cold in my hand and felt a calm settle in that scared me more than anger ever had. Calm meant decisions were coming. I started documenting. Photos from every angle. Time-stamped. Close-ups of the mud, the cones, the sign that claimed unauthorized access like it was gospel. I printed the county plat maps and highlighted my parcel in yellow so bright it looked radioactive. I pulled the deed from the safe and laid it flat, smoothing the creases like it was a map out of a burning building. Then I called my lawyer and told him exactly what happened, including the filming, the letter, the timing, and the ambulance. He went quiet for a second, the good kind of quiet. He told me not to touch the cones again. He told me to expect escalation. He told me to keep breathing. By mid-morning the HOA showed up in a convoy. Linda led it, clipboard tucked under her arm like a shield. 2 board members flanked her. A guy I had never seen before wore a polo with a law firm logo stitched on the chest, like he was trying to look official without actually saying anything official. They stopped at the edge of the driveway and waited for me to come out. I let them wait. When I finally stepped onto the porch, Linda smiled the way people do when they think they are winning something that never belonged to them. She announced they were there to conduct a safety inspection. She said the ambulance incident proved the driveway was non-compliant. She said until it was remediated, access would be restricted for the good of the community. The lawyer Polo cleared his throat and started explaining shared easements in a voice that sounded like it had never been tested by reality. I let them talk. I watched their mouths move. I thought about Carl gasping for air while they debated liability. I told them they were trespassing. Linda said the HOA had authority. I asked her to show it. She waved the clipboard. I asked for a document with my signature. She said it was implied. I laughed again, short and sharp. I told them to leave. The lawyer Polo tried to step forward and stopped when I pointed at the camera mounted under my eave. He looked up, then back at me, recalculating. Linda did not recalibrate. She never does. An hour later, a tow truck tried to block the driveway. It rolled in slow, hazard lights blinking like it was embarrassed. The driver looked apologetic even before I said a word. He said he had an order to secure access pending review. I asked who ordered it. He said the HOA. I asked if he had a court order. He shook his head. I told him to turn around. He hesitated. Linda appeared again, phone already out, narrating. The driver put the truck in neutral and sighed like a man choosing between 2 bad options. I called the sheriff. The deputy who showed up knew me. He knew my land. He listened while Linda talked over everyone, then he asked her a simple question. Did you call 911 during the ambulance incident? She said no. Did you direct emergency services? She said she documented. He told the tow driver to leave. The truck left. Linda did not. She argued. The deputy warned her. She argued louder. He warned her again. She finally backed off, red-faced, promising this was not over. That afternoon my lawyer called back with a plan. Certified letters. Injunction filings. Emergency access statutes highlighted like a roadmap. He told me the ambulance changed everything. He told me to expect the HOA to double down. He told me to prepare for cameras, complaints, and performative outrage. He told me to stay clean. No yelling. No touching. Let them make the mistakes. They made them fast. By evening, posts went up along the driveway edge. Wooden stakes with yellow tape fluttering like flags. A new sign appeared, bigger than the last, with language that sounded legal but felt homemade. Neighbors from the development gathered like it was entertainment. Phones came out. Comments flew. Someone shouted about safety. Someone else shouted back about common sense. I stood in my yard and watched people argue about a driveway that had existed longer than most of them had been alive. Then an email hit my inbox. The HOA had fined me. Daily fines. Retroactive. Failure to comply. Creating a hazard. Interfering with community safety operations. The list went on. I forwarded it to my lawyer without replying. I made dinner I did not taste. I checked the driveway again after dark. Flashlight beam cutting across tape and signs like a bad stage set. I wondered what would happen the next time someone needed help. The next morning, help came. Not with sirens this time. With a clipboard and a badge that actually mattered. A county inspector pulled up and asked to see the driveway. He had received a complaint. He walked it slowly, boots sinking into yesterday's mud, measuring tape snapping open, camera clicking. He asked about the ambulance. I told him everything. He frowned at the signs. He frowned deeper at the cones. He asked who placed them. I told him. He wrote notes. Lots of notes. When he left, he shook my hand and told me something I had been waiting to hear. Emergency access cannot be obstructed. Not by anyone. Not by an HOA. Not by implication. He said there would be a report. He said people had short memories when they think rules protect them. He drove away, leaving dust and silence behind. By noon, Linda was back. This time she was not smiling. This time she brought a printed notice taped to a plywood board, hammered into the ground at the driveway entrance like a dare. She said the HOA meeting was that night. She said my presence was requested. She said it would be best if I cooperated. I looked at the board. I looked at the ruts. I thought about Carl. I told her I would be there. And for the first time since this started, she looked unsure. The HOA meeting was held in a multipurpose room that smelled like carpet cleaner and burned coffee, the kind of place where tempers rise faster because the air feels borrowed. Folding chairs were lined in rows, half filled with neighbors who looked like they had come for entertainment, not resolution. A long table sat at the front with name placards taped down crooked. Linda's was centered. Of course it was. I arrived early and sat in the back where I could see everyone without being seen. My lawyer had told me not to speak unless spoken to. Observe. Let them talk themselves into trouble. Linda took that advice from me without knowing it. She opened the meeting with a practiced sigh and a speech about safety, responsibility, and community harmony. She mentioned the ambulance like it was an inconvenience that had interrupted her day, not a man's life that had almost ended. When public comments opened, hands shot up. One neighbor complained about dust. Another complained about property values. A woman said she felt unsafe knowing emergency vehicles could get confused. I waited. Then Linda called my name, voice tight, smile gone. She asked me to explain why I refused to comply with reasonable safety measures. I stood and felt every eye lock on. I spoke calmly. I talked about the driveway's age, the deed, the map. I talked about Carl collapsing and an ambulance getting stuck in mud that had been dumped there intentionally. I talked about cones placed without authority. I talked about emergency access laws. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I let the facts sit in the room like a bad smell. Linda interrupted twice. I kept going. The room shifted. People stopped looking bored. Someone whispered. A man in the front row frowned at Linda instead of me. She tapped her pen hard enough to crack the plastic. When I finished, Linda said the board would deliberate. They did not ask me to leave, which felt like a mistake. They whispered loudly. They glanced back at me like I was a stain they could not scrub out. Finally, Linda cleared her throat and announced the board's decision. They would proceed with enforcement. The driveway would remain restricted pending legal review. Fines would continue. The community's safety demanded it. There it was. The moment where logic left the building. I nodded and sat down. I left without another word. Outside, the night felt cooler, heavier. I sat in my truck for a minute with the engine off, listening to my own breathing. Then my phone buzzed. My lawyer. He had been watching the meeting livestream someone had posted. He did not sound surprised. He sounded ready. The next day the escalation came with paint. I woke to yellow lines sprayed across the driveway entrance, jagged and sloppy, like someone had tried to draw authority freehand. More signs appeared. Bigger ones. One included the word emergency in all caps, as if typing louder made it true. The cones were back, weighted this time with sandbags. A barricade sat just far enough in to force vehicles to slow and swerve. I called my lawyer. He told me not to touch anything. I called the county inspector. He said he would return. I called the fire marshal's office and left a message explaining what had happened, carefully, clearly, without emotion. Then I waited. Neighbors gathered again. Phones out. Someone muttered that this had gone too far. Someone else said rules were rules. Linda arrived mid-morning with 2 board members and a man carrying a camera on a stabilizer, like this was content. She stood by the barricade and talked about proactive safety measures. I stood on my porch and said nothing. A delivery truck tried to come down the driveway and stopped short. The driver leaned out and asked if he should turn around. Linda told him yes. I stepped forward and said no. The driver looked between us like a child watching parents argue. He asked who was in charge. I told him to wait. Linda told him to leave. He waited. The fire marshal arrived in a white truck with red lettering that did not blink or scream but somehow felt louder than sirens. He got out slowly, took in the scene, and asked a single question. Who put this here? Linda answered before anyone else could. She said the HOA had acted in the interest of safety. The fire marshal walked the barricade. He measured. He photographed. He knelt and tested the sandbags with his boot. He looked at the delivery truck. He looked at me. Then he looked back at Linda and told her to remove everything immediately. She argued. Of course she did. She cited bylaws. He cited code. She cited authority. He cited law. She raised her voice. He did not. He told her obstructing emergency access was a violation. He told her fines were not her problem anymore. He told her to move the barricade now or he would. The camera guy kept filming. Linda's face went tight, then pale. Board members whispered. Slowly, reluctantly, they started dragging cones aside. Sandbags thumped onto the grass. The yellow tape came down. The fire marshal watched until the driveway was clear. Then he handed Linda a notice and told her to expect follow-up. The delivery truck drove through. The driver gave me a small nod like we had survived something together. I thought that would end it. I was wrong. That night, someone tried to block the driveway again. Not with cones. With a car. It was parked sideways just past the entrance, hazard lights off, engine cold. No note. No warning. I called the sheriff. While I waited, headlights appeared at the top of the drive. A neighbor needed help. Her kid had fallen off a bike and hit his head hard. She was panicking, trying to get out. The sheriff arrived fast. He ran the plate. HOA board member. Linda was not there, but her shadow was. The car was towed. The deputy asked if I wanted to press charges. I said I wanted it documented. He nodded like he understood that choice. By midnight my phone was full of messages. Neighbors apologizing. Others accusing. Someone sent me a video of Linda yelling at the tow operator earlier that evening. Someone else sent me a screenshot of a private HOA group chat where my name was circled in red. I sat at my kitchen table again, the same spot as before, but this time my hands were steady. They had crossed another line. And now there was proof. Cameras, reports, officials, witnesses, the kind of things that do not go away. As I turned off the lights and looked out at the clear, open driveway, I realized something else had changed. The fear had shifted. It was no longer sitting with me. It had moved across the property line. By the fourth day, the HOA stopped pretending this was about safety and started treating it like a siege. The driveway stayed clear, but everything around it became louder. Emails came in waves. Notices CC'd half the neighborhood. Posts went up on community boards accusing me of endangering families, emergency workers, and property values in the same breath. My name was spelled wrong half the time, which somehow made it worse. Linda signed every message with her full title, as if length could substitute for authority. I stayed quiet. That silence seemed to unnerve them more than shouting ever could. The county inspector returned with 2 other officials mid-morning. They walked the driveway again, checked measurements, reviewed photographs from the ambulance night, and asked me to narrate events from start to finish. I did, slowly, carefully, like I was reading a report I had already memorized. One of them asked if the HOA had ever provided written authorization or court orders. I said no. Another asked if they had ever coordinated with emergency services. I said no again. Pens scratched. Heads nodded. Faces hardened. While they worked, Linda stood across the road with 2 board members, whispering furiously. At one point she walked over and tried to insert herself into the conversation. One of the officials held up a hand without even looking at her and told her this was not her inspection. She froze mid-sentence, visibly offended, then backed away like someone who had just touched a hot stove. That afternoon a formal notice was issued. Emergency access must remain unobstructed at all times. Any further interference would result in penalties. The notice did not mention my name. It mentioned the HOA's. I taped a copy inside my kitchen cabinet like a quiet trophy. That should have ended it. It did not. 2 nights later, my motion lights snapped on at 2:17 a.m. I watched from my bedroom window as shadows moved near the driveway entrance. Not cones this time. Not signs. 2 figures crouched low, working fast. One held a flashlight. The other dragged something heavy that scraped against gravel with a sound that made my jaw clench. I grabbed my phone and started recording. They dropped what looked like landscaping timbers across the drive, staggered just enough to force any vehicle to slow or stop. One of them slipped, swore quietly, then laughed. The sound carried in the night. Familiar. Too familiar. The flashlight swung up and caught my fence, my gate, my camera. It froze there for half a second, then snapped off. I stepped outside and spoke loudly into the dark. I said their names. Silence. Then hurried footstep. An engine started. A car sped away without lights. I filmed the plates as best I could, heart pounding, breath steady. When the tail lights disappeared, I walked down and moved the timbers myself, muscles burning with controlled fury. I did not call the sheriff. Not yet. The next morning, I sent the video to my lawyer. He watched it twice. He did not smile. He told me to send it to the county. He told me to send it to the fire marshal. He told me to back it up in 3 places. Then he said something that made my stomach drop and my resolve harden at the same time. He said they were panicking. By noon, Linda called me directly for the first time. Her voice was tight, brittle. She said there had been misunderstandings. She said some members may have acted independently. She said the board wanted to resolve this amicably. I asked her if she wanted to start by apologizing for blocking an ambulance. She paused too long. I told her all communication should go through my lawyer and hung up. The HOA meeting announcement went out that evening. Emergency session. Mandatory attendance. Agenda listed driveway resolution as the first item. I did not respond. Instead, I received a visit. A man in a suit showed up just before sunset. Not the polo lawyer from before. This one carried a leather briefcase and introduced himself as representing the HOA. He asked if we could talk. I said we could talk outside. He tried to sound reasonable. He said litigation was expensive. He said misunderstandings happen. He said the board was willing to negotiate access terms. I told him there was nothing to negotiate. The driveway existed. Emergency access was non-negotiable. The law was clear. He adjusted his tie and said the HOA was prepared to escalate. I told him they already had. I told him to leave. That night, another ambulance came down my driveway. This time it did not get stuck. A woman from the development had gone into labor early. Her husband panicked and drove straight to my place because the main road entrance was blocked for resurfacing. I waved them through without thinking. The ambulance followed, tires crunching confidently over solid ground. Paramedics worked fast. The woman cried. The husband thanked me with shaking hands. Linda watched from across the road. She did not speak. She did not film. She just stood there as the ambulance passed cleanly through, lights flashing, proof rolling right in front of her that the driveway worked exactly as it always had. Neighbors watched too. Some with relief. Some with shame. Some with dawning understanding. The next morning, screenshots circulated. HOA emails leaked. Messages where Linda talked about forcing compliance. About making an example. About waiting me out. The tone was not good. Not reasonable. Not safe. People started asking questions in public threads Linda could not delete fast enough. By the end of the week, the county scheduled a formal hearing. I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun sink behind the trees lining the driveway. It looked the same as it always had. Quiet. Open. Honest. I thought about how hard they had tried to turn it into a weapon, and how badly it had backfired. The hearing was coming. And this time they would not control the room. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, which felt deliberate, like someone wanted to force people to take time off work if they cared enough to show up. I arrived early again, this time with my lawyer beside me and a thick folder that felt heavier than paper should. The room was larger than the HOA meeting hall and brighter, with long tables arranged in a way that suggested order rather than authority. County officials sat at the front. A fire marshal, a planning commissioner, a clerk typing steadily, already bored in the way professionals get when they know a long day is ahead. Linda arrived late. She swept in with 2 board members and the suited lawyer, heels clicking sharp against the floor like punctuation marks. She did not look at me. She did not need to. I could feel her attention like pressure. When everyone was seated, the chair opened the hearing and explained the purpose in neutral tones. Emergency access obstruction. Unauthorized enforcement actions. Potential violations. The words sounded almost too calm for what they represented. The county presented first. Photos appeared on a screen. The mud. The cones. The barricades. Time stamps aligned with emergency calls. The ambulance report was read aloud, carefully, clinically, but the words stuck anyway. Delayed access. Impeded response. Patient critical. Linda shifted in her chair. One of the board members stared straight ahead like he was trying to disappear through the wall. Then the fire marshal spoke. He described what he had found, what code required, and what had been ignored. He did not editorialize. He did not raise his voice. That somehow made it worse. He finished by stating plainly that any further obstruction could result in severe penalties. The room was very quiet. Then it was the HOA's turn. Their lawyers stood and talked for a long time without saying much. He spoke about intent, about misunderstandings, about community concerns. He tried to frame the actions as overzealous but well-meaning. When he mentioned the driveway being confusing for emergency vehicles, the fire marshal looked down at his notes and wrote something new. Linda was called to speak. She stood slowly, smoothing her blazer, and launched into a speech that sounded practiced and brittle. She talked about safety, about fear, about responsibility. She talked about me like I was an obstacle rather than a person. When she described the ambulance incident, she used the word unfortunate. I felt my jaw tighten. My lawyer placed a hand lightly on my arm, grounding me. Then I was called. I stood and told the truth. I told it in order. I told it without embellishment. I talked about Carl. About the mud. About the cones reappearing. About the car blocking the driveway at night. About the timbers. About the leaked messages. I handed over the video. I handed over the map. I handed over the deed. I talked about the second ambulance, the one that passed through cleanly, carrying a woman in labor who had no time for politics. I did not look at Linda while I spoke. I did not need to. When I finished, the chair asked if there were questions. There were many. Most of them were for the HOA. Why no court order? Why no coordination with emergency services? Why repeated actions after warnings? Linda tried to answer. She stumbled. She contradicted herself. At one point she said something about teaching a lesson. The room reacted to that like it had heard a bad word. The chair called a short recess. During that break, neighbors approached me quietly. Some apologized. Some thanked me. One man admitted he had helped place cones early on because Linda told him it was legal. He looked shaken. He said he had not known about the ambulance. I believed him. That was the worst part. So many people had followed because it was easier than questioning authority. When the hearing resumed, the decision came faster than I expected. The HOA was ordered to cease all enforcement actions related to my driveway immediately. All fines were voided. A formal warning was issued regarding obstruction of emergency access. The matter was referred for further review regarding individual conduct. Linda's name was mentioned directly. Not loudly. Not angrily. Just officially. She did not react at first. Then her face flushed, deep red climbing her neck. The suited lawyer leaned in and whispered. She shook her head. Hard. The chair banged the gavel lightly and closed the hearing. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. My lawyer smiled for the first time since this began. He told me this was not over, but the ground had shifted. He told me to go home and rest. I made it halfway back before my phone started buzzing. Messages. Screenshot. A resignation email from a board member. Then another. Then another. Someone forwarded me a community post announcing an emergency HOA election. Linda's name was missing from the signature. Then a final message came through, sent to the entire neighborhood by accident instead of the board's private list. It was from Linda. She accused the county of overreach. She accused neighbors of betrayal. She accused me of manipulation. She ended by saying she would not be silenced and that this was far from over. I pulled into my driveway and sat there, engine idling, looking at the open path ahead. The same path that had caused all of this. The same path that now felt like a line drawn clean and clear. I turned off the engine, stepped out, and noticed something new. Someone had removed the last sign. No cones. No tape. No warnings. Just gravel, sunlight, and quiet. For the first time since the ambulance night, I let myself breathe. And somewhere deep down, I knew this calm was temporary. Because people like Linda do not accept consequences easily. They look for other ways to feel powerful. She had lost the board. But she had not yet accepted the loss. The calm lasted exactly 3 days. On the fourth morning I woke to the sound of engines that did not belong on a quiet stretch of gravel. Not sirens. Not construction. Just idling vehicles, too many of them, clustered where they had no reason to be. I stepped onto the porch and saw a line of cars parked along the public road near my driveway, doors opening. People gathering like this was a tailgate instead of a confrontation. At the center of it all stood Linda. She was not wearing her blazer this time. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a sweatshirt with the HOA logo stretched across the chest like a badge reclaimed. She looked smaller without the formal costume, but somehow more dangerous. Less official. More personal. Someone had organized a protest. Handwritten signs bobbed above heads. Safety first. Protect our community. Private driveways endanger lives. The irony sat so heavy in my chest it almost made me laugh. Linda paced back and forth, talking, pointing, giving instructions. Phones were out. Live streams were running. This was no longer about rules. This was about saving face in public. I did not go down to them. I stayed on my porch and watched. I called my lawyer and put him on speaker. He listened to the noise through the phone and told me to document everything. He told me not to engage. He told me this was exactly the kind of behavior that turned warnings into consequences. Linda spotted me a few minutes later. She waved like we were old friends. Then she shouted that she was exercising her right to assemble. She said the community had a right to feel safe. Someone else shouted that I was reckless. Another person yelled something about lawsuit. The crowd fed itself. A delivery van tried to pass and slowed to a crawl. The driver looked confused, then frustrated. Linda stepped into the road and raised a hand. She told him to turn around. I felt my stomach drop. I dialed the sheriff before my lawyer could finish his sentence. The deputy arrived quickly, lights on but no siren. He parked and stepped out, hands resting casually on his belt. He spoke to Linda first. She talked fast, gesturing at the crowd, at the driveway, at me. The deputy listened, then shook his head. He told her she could protest on the sidewalk. He told her she could not direct traffic. He told her she could not obstruct access. She argued. Again. This time he did not warn her twice. He told her to step back. She did not. He told her again. She pointed at me and raised her voice. He told her to turn around and put her hands behind her back. The crowd gasped like they were watching a show take a turn they had not expected. Linda froze. For a moment I thought she might comply. Instead, she laughed. She said he would regret it. She said she knew her rights. She said this would be on every platform by noon. The deputy sighed, took her arm, and guided her away from the road. The cuffs clicked shut with a sound that carried. Phones went wild. Shouts erupted. Some people protested. Others backed away, suddenly unsure. Linda's face twisted between fury and disbelief as she was led to the cruiser. She shouted my name once, sharp and accusing like a curse. The protest dissolved within minutes after that. Cars left. Signs dropped. People avoided my eyes as they passed. The road cleared. The driveway stayed open. By afternoon, videos were everywhere. Linda arguing with the deputy. Linda refusing to step back. Linda being handcuffed. Context did not matter as much as the image. The same woman who had filmed everything suddenly hated cameras. Messages poured in again, but this time the tone was different. Supportive. Apologetic. Some angry at her. Some embarrassed by their own involvement. That evening my lawyer called with an update. Linda had been cited for obstruction and failure to comply with a lawful order. The county had reopened its review. The HOA's insurance provider had contacted the board. Words like liability and exposure were being used with increasing frequency. He told me to expect one last move from her. Desperate people rarely stop quietly. He was right. Just after midnight, the power went out. Not the whole area. Just my place. The house went dark. The hum of appliances died. Motion lights stayed off. My phone buzzed with a notification from the security system switching to battery. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The night felt thick. Too still. At the transformer near the road, a shape moved. I did not approach. I zoomed in with my phone camera. The figure straightened, light catching a familiar outline. Same posture. Same hair. Linda froze when she realized she had been seen. For a split second, the confidence was gone. Replaced by something raw and frightened. I spoke calmly. I told her the camera was recording. I told her the system was redundant. I told her to leave. She said nothing. She dropped the tool she was holding and ran to her car. Tires spun. Gravel flew. She was gone. I did not chase. I called the sheriff. By morning, the footage had been reviewed. Clear enough. Too clear. My lawyer's voice was steady when he called. He said this crossed from civil into criminal. He said charges were likely. He said the board had officially removed Linda from any role, permanent and irreversible. When the sun rose, the driveway looked the same as it always had. Open. Quiet. Unremarkable. Exactly what it was supposed to be. And for the first time since this started, I believed the ending was finally coming into view. By the time Chapter 7 arrived, the story had escaped my driveway and grown teeth. I woke to reporters parked along the public road, camera lenses aimed like accusations. Someone had tipped them off, and it did not take much imagination to guess who. The protest arrest video had gone semi-viral overnight. Not nationwide, but enough to attract the kind of attention that feeds on conflict. HOA power trip. Ambulance delayed. Arrest caught on camera. The narrative had formed without my permission, and now it was circling. I did not talk to them. My lawyer had been very clear. No statements, no interviews, no clarifications. Let the record speak. And the record was thick now. Too thick to spin. Linda, meanwhile, had vanished. Her house sat dark during the day. Curtains drawn. Car gone. Neighbors whispered. Some said she was advised to stay quiet. Others said she was planning something big. One rumor claimed she was suing everyone involved, including the county, the fire marshal, and me. Another said she was being investigated for misuse of HOA funds. That one turned out to be true. The board contacted me through their new interim president, a man who sounded exhausted just speaking. He apologized. More than once. He said they were dissolving enforcement actions related to my property entirely. He said they wanted to put this behind them. I told him I had nothing left to discuss. He sounded relieved. Then came the subpoena. It arrived folded neatly, hand-delivered, and heavy with consequence. Linda had filed a civil complaint against the county, the HOA, and me personally. Abuse of authority. Defamation. Emotional distress. She named everyone she could reach, like casting a net and hoping something would thrash. My lawyer read it once, then again, then laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind that comes from recognizing a fatal mistake. He told me this filing opened doors Linda should have left closed. Discovery would be brutal. Messages, emails, financial records. The private HOA chat logs that had already leaked would now be examined under oath. The county moved fast. So did the HOA's insurance company. Coverage was denied for actions taken outside authority. Linda was on her own. A week later, she was arrested again. This time it was quieter. No crowd. No shouting. Charges related to tampering with utilities and repeated obstruction of emergency access. The footage from the transformer had sealed it. Intent was clear. Pattern was established. The prosecutor did not play games. I found out from a notification on my phone, not from the news. That same day Carl came by. He walked slower than before, but he walked. He leaned on a cane and smiled like a man who knew exactly how close he had come to not being here. He thanked me again, and this time I let it land. We sat on the porch and watched the driveway like it was a river returning to its natural course. He said something that stuck with me. He said people like Linda do not want rules. They want permission to hurt people politely. The civil case collapsed within weeks. Motions dismissed. Claims thrown out. Linda's lawyer withdrew. The HOA settled with the county under terms that included mandatory emergency access training, oversight, and a complete restructuring of leadership. Fines were issued. Public apologies were posted. Screenshots were saved forever. Linda pled out. No dramatic trial. No speech. Just a quiet agreement that included probation, restitution, and a permanent order barring her from holding any HOA position ever again. The irony was sharp enough to taste. The reporters left. The road returned to normal traffic. The driveway became just a driveway again. Grass grew back along the edges where cones had once stood. Tire ruts softened and disappeared. Even the mud stains faded. One evening, weeks later, an ambulance drove past my place without stopping, lights on, siren echoing briefly through the trees. It did not need my driveway that time. Still, I stood and watched it go, heart steady. I thought about how small this all started. A note. A complaint. A woman who thought authority was something you could grab and squeeze until people complied. She had tried to ban a driveway. Instead, she banned herself from power forever. And the end was close now. Not loud. Not explosive. Just inevitable. The last change came quietly, the way real endings usually do. One morning I stepped outside and realized I had gone an entire week without checking the driveway first. No scanning for cones. No listening for engines that did not belong. No instinctive tightening in my chest when headlights slowed near the entrance. It was just there, doing what it had always done, leading in and out without drama or permission. The HOA dissolved 3 months later. Not in flames. Not in scandal headlines. Just a vote, a filing, and a notice posted on a corkboard that no one bothered to photograph. The development transitioned to a management company with no enforcement authority over private land. Emergency access clauses were written in bold language this time. The kind lawyers use when they never want to revisit a mistake. Linda moved away. I did not hear it from her. I heard it from a neighbor who said the house sold fast and quiet. No goodbye post. No farewell message. Just a moving truck early one morning and a for sale sign gone by noon. Some people said she left angry. Others said embarrassed. I suspect it was something closer to hollow. Power, once lost publicly, rarely leaves dignity behind. The probation order included mandatory counseling, community service, and a permanent ban from any governing role tied to residential associations. I read the summary once and put it away. I did not feel victorious reading it. Just finished. Carl recovered fully by the end of summer. He stopped by one afternoon without the cane, carrying a sack of peaches from his tree. He stood in the driveway for a long moment before handing them to me, like he was standing on something sacred. He said he still thought about that night sometimes, about how close it had been. He said he was glad I did not back down. I told him I had not known how not to. The driveway healed. Gravel resettled. Grass crept back along the edges. Tire marks faded into memory. If you did not know the story, there was nothing to see. That felt important. Places should not have to carry the weight of other people's delusions forever. One evening, months later, I heard sirens again. They were farther away this time, coming down the main road. Still, I stood up from dinner and walked to the porch without thinking. Old habits linger. The ambulance passed the entrance, lights flickering through the trees, and kept going. No hesitation. No confusion. No obstruction. I smiled and went back inside. The county sent a final letter shortly after, confirming closure of all related actions. It thanked me for cooperation and patience. I laughed at that part. Patience had not been a choice. It had been survival disguised as restraint. Every once in a while, someone new to the neighborhood asks about the driveway. Why it is gravel. Why it runs where it does. I tell them the truth in the simplest way possible. It was here first. It works. It does not need permission. They usually nod and move on. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close this came to ending differently. How easily panic and ego can harden into danger. How authority, when worn like a costume instead of earned through responsibility, becomes reckless fast. I think about the ambulance stuck in mud and a woman arguing bylaws while a man fought for breath. That image never fully leaves. But it does not own me anymore. The story people remember is simpler. HOA overreached. Karma arrived. Justice restored. They like clean arcs. I understand that. What they do not see is the quieter lesson underneath it all. Rules without humanity are just weapons with nicer packaging. My driveway was never the problem. It was just the place where someone's need for control finally ran out of road. And in the end, the thing that changed everything was not anger or shouting or even law. It was an open path that refused to be closed again.